Get in the game with the college-branded Venmo debit card. Wreck your team with every tap and earn up to 5% cash back with Venmo Stash, a new rewards program from Venmo. No monthly fee, no minimum balance, just school pride and spending power. Get in the game and sign up for the Venmo debit card at venmo.com/collegecard. The Venmo MasterCard is issued by the Bancorp Bank N.A. Select schools available. Venmo Stash terms and exclusions apply at venmo.me/stash terms. Max $100 cash back per month.
For the News and Observer, I'm Dawn Vaughan, Capitol Bureau Chief and host of Under the Dome. You're listening to our latest episode for the week of January 6, 2025. Happy New Year, everyone. Maybe you've been, out of the news for the past 2 weeks. Some of us came back right after New Year's. Other people weren't even off, but we're already having a pretty big state government week. Today, I'm joined by reporters Kyle Ingram and Korie Dean. And we're going to talk about what to expect this week, what to expect this coming year. And after the break, we'll have our NC politics ins and outs and our headliners. So let's get going with a quick scheduling of what to know what's going on at the legislature. Wednesday is the official first day of session, and that is the swearing in of all 120 lawmakers. It's a big ceremonial day. Their families usually come, all the press comes, and that's really what it is. It's more of like for the freshmen, it's like, hey, look at me. I'm I'm in state, in the legislature now. For the returning people, it's kind of like the first day of school of another grade where you're seeing everybody again. And it's usually kind of an upbeat moment, not a lot of drama. Sometimes there can be. Like as we're recording this on Friday, that's when, DC's legislature, Congress is starting, and there might be some drama with their House Speaker election. But here we've already known Republican House members who have the one vote shy of the supermajority have decided that Rules Chair Dustin Hall is going to be Speaker, but there's still a formality vote that they have to do. So that'll happen. Robert Reeves, the Democratic House leader, he'll continue as minority leader, again, with the same formality. And then in the Senate, we'll still have Phil Berger as Senate leader. We'll talk more about, he's really the only one sticking around of the top three most powerful politicians in the state. And then instead of Democratic minority leader Dan Blue, it's going to be Sidney Batch. So legislature starts Wednesday. Then on Saturday is new Governor Josh Stein's inauguration ceremony. It's at 10 o'clock in the morning, downtown on the Capitol grounds outside. So I'll be covering that. So let's hope that it's not snowing, or if there is snow, just a little bit of picturesque snow. That's my wish for the weather that day, and not incredibly freezing. So he'll have his inaugural swearing in, other members of council of state. Of course, everybody already did this on New Year's Day, but this is the big public, pomp and circumstance event. And then there's supposed to be a block party downtown with Stein. And then on that Sunday, there'll be an open house at the executive mansion. So that's the big stuff happening this week. Let's get into what we are already seeing. So Stein, 2 days into his, gubernatorial administration, he signed 5 Helene relief executive orders. And we got a press release comment from someone, and it's not usually who it would be. So Korie, I'm going to let you tell listeners, if they don't already know, who decided to comment first on Governor Stein's orders.
Yeah, so longtime listeners of the podcast will know that we've talked quite a bit recently about Dave Bullock becoming the newly elected state auditor. He was the Republican candidate and served on the UNC Chapel Hill trustees. So I cover higher education, and so I was pretty familiar with him. But like Dawn said, it was, I don't know, maybe less than, an hour or so, or around that time that, Stein had announced these orders. And then, we get an email from Dave Bullock's office that he he said something along the lines of, I appreciate these efforts that you're making, and, I want to work together with you. I think he mentioned some small modification that Stein's staff had made to the orders after talking with Bullock or something along those lines. But, the bottom line was that Bullock, as auditor, wants to know where the money is going and how it's being spent, and is going to, want to keep track of that. And, that's obviously the role of the auditor, is to keep track of state spending and to be the watchdog on that. And Dave Bullock definitely campaigned on that pretty heavily with agencies like the DMV or DHHS. So, yeah, I think this was an example of him coming out of the gate and really, trying to publicly, stick to what he had campaigned on and what he wants to do in that office. So pretty interesting there.
Two things I'm watching from that is this the new front of Republican versus Democrat? Because instead of the legislature, it's a Republican fellow council state member. And if the pushback between the two political parties ends up coming, within the council of state, or is Bullock going to become, as an auditor, more like Beth Wood, the Democrat who resigned after her car scandal, I guess is the shortest way to describe it. But she had a lot of bipartisan support because she didn't pull punches with anybody and audited everyone. So as Bullock will it be that? Will it be kind of more partisan what we see? And then he also has two former Berger staffers now on his staff. So Kyle, what's your take on it?
I think it's going to be a really interesting dynamic to watch over the next 4 years, especially considering that Republicans haven't held the auditor's office in, I think, over a decade in North Carolina. So now you're going to be seeing that dynamic where he is potentially sparring with the governor and other Democratic members of the Council of State. And what's really interesting is that he's going to have a power that no other auditors in North Carolina's history have ever had, which is to appoint members to the State Board of Elections. That was recently given to him in the final days of the Republican supermajority. They decided to rest that power in the auditor's office instead of the governorship, which is what it's been for most of North Carolina's history. So he's going to be able, unless this is struck down by a court, he'll be able to flip the partisan majority of the State Board of Elections, which has had a 3-2 Democratic majority since Governor Cooper was elected in 2016. And now we'll have Republican control, and people are going to be looking pretty intently at who his choices are to pick that. Is he going to pick, people who were critical of the election results and denied the election results in 2020? Is he going to pick more moderate Republicans? We'll have to wait until this spring to see.
And that picks 2 Democrats, right? So it's 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats. Yeah. So other changes and dynamics that first of all, the first Council of State meeting has the potential to be lit. So I'm looking forward to that. We'll see. It's such a different dynamic. And we should mention how many other changes of the people that sit around that table. Of course, Stein has sat at that table for the past 8 years as Attorney General. He moved seats to the head of the table where Cooper sat. Lieutenant Governor now is Rachel Hunt. The Superintendent now is Moon Green. Insurance Commissioner Causey is back. Ag Commissioner Troxler is back. Secretary of State Marshall is back. Labor Commissioner is new. Luke Farley. Treasurer is new. Breitner. And I know I'm forgetting somebody. There's 10 of them. So every time we write these stories, you always think about let me go, run down my list. But one thing with leadership that I think is interesting is that I'd never seen in the years I've covered the ledge. It's always been, Republican Senate Leader Berger, and then the Lieutenant Governor is a Republican, and they usually let Berger preside most of the time. But now the Lieutenant Governor is a Democrat, Rachel Hunt, and it's her job to preside over the Senate. She'll only vote in case of a tie, but that's kind of something interesting to see. I don't know what you all think, how that'll change the vibe, really in the Senate. What do you think?
I think it's going to be interesting to see, especially because we don't have a lot of experience, as you mentioned, in recent years with seeing anyone other than Senator Berger preside over the Senate. There were a few cases where Lieutenant Governor Robinson did so in ceremonial instances, but he was the same party. And again, like you said, Rachel Hunt is only going to be able to cast a vote in the event of a tie. So it's really unclear to me what sort of procedural, tracks that she could run on that could disrupt things a little bit in the Senate, but it'll be an interesting dynamic to watch.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. We'll talk more about how things are going to be different at the ledge this year. then give our political ins and outs and our picks for headliner of the week. We'll be right back.
We gather here tonight to bring women back to their rightful place.
The Testaments, a new Hulu original series from the executive producers of The Handmaid's Tale.
It's easier to accept a story than believe that the people around you are monsters.
The battle isn't over.
There comes a time when you have to take action, when you have to choose your own destiny.
Never quite as it seems. Watch the new Hulu original series, The Testaments, April 8th on Hulu and Hulu on Disney Plus for bundle subscribers. Terms apply.
You're listening to Under the Dome. I'm Capitol Bureau Chief Dawn Vaughan, here with reporters Korie Dean and Kyle Ingram. Before the break, we were talking about changes in leadership at the legislature, including a Democratic lieutenant governor, and part of their job is to preside over the Senate. So that could change things with the dynamic between Lieutenant Governor Hunt and Senate Leader Berger. Of course, Hunt just served in the state Senate and the state House before that. So she's well versed in how things are run in parliamentary procedure, which not all lieutenant governors have been up to speed on all the time. But Hunt has a fair amount of experience sitting in that chamber. The other change that we touched on briefly is how Blue Batch is now the Senate Democratic leader instead of Blue. Blue is still a senator, of course. This was what the caucus chose. I think some of us thought maybe the second, if Blue wasn't going to be leader, it would be the number two for the past session, which was Senator Jake Choudhury. He's still whip, but it's Batch is what the caucus chose. So I think that's like things that'll sort of change things also with having her. This is a woman. It's been just all men for the past several years. As far as in leadership, I don't know. What do you think, Kyle, as far as what we might see differently in the Senate?
Well, I think it's interesting that Democrats are going younger with their leadership in North Carolina, which is something I think people have asked of Democrats nationally and not seen happen. But, Anderson Clayton is the chair of the Democratic Party here. She started that job at 25 years old, is running for re-election in that seat. So it's interesting to see that happen on a state level. I want to see what the relationship is like between Destin Hall and Senator Berger going forward. Tim Moore and Phil Berger had been the leaders of the House and Senate for a very long time. They had developed a relationship with each other. They sparred with each other often. The House and Senate had budget debates quite frequently, and it was always sort of a toss-up to see whether the House or Senate was going to end up getting their way. Now you have to wonder, with a new speaker in the House who is younger and has spent less time in the chamber, is the Senate going to have the upper hand in the sort of budget negotiations going forward?
I think that's a good point. And Sydney Batch is middle-aged. I'm not sure exactly how old she is. So it's a generational shift. She's certainly a generation younger than Blue. And Hall is a little bit younger. I don't think he's 40 yet. And that's a shift from Moore's younger than Berger. Moore's in his 50s. So it's about like at least a 20-year drop, in age. So that's a big shift there. And as you mentioned, sometimes if people don't make the decisions themselves, those that can control it make it for them. And on the Anderson Clayton point, I noticed that she's running to stay in her leadership role with the state party. And of course, she delivered for Democrats that one vote shift, which breaks the supermajority. So we're going to turn to a quick ins and outs. This is just more of a lighter / serious thing. I'll go first. Mine. For the legislature, my out is any more attempts to get rid of seasoning salt again. We're glad that is settled. And since we're actually talking about ceremonies this week, is making sure we get a sine die ceremony when it's time again, since we got a little shortchanged on that this past legislative session. So those are mine. Kyle, what's your in and out?
My in for this legislative session will be attendance counting. We're going to have to be paying a lot more attention to that in the House specifically going forward, just because Republicans are now one vote shy of that supermajority. And of course, the veto override map is not a supermajority of the total members, but it's the total members that show up that day. So we'll need to be paying attention to see who's showing up and who's not, and if they could surprise us with an override out of nowhere. And then my out, I guess I would say, is things always starting late. And those of us who cover the legislature know that when something says it's going to happen at 1:00, that typically means it's going to happen at 1:30 or 1:45 or 2:00. And I'd love it if we just go right when it says it's going to happen going forward.
I wonder if the House time will become more like Senate time. Senate will start late, like 20 minutes late, but the House is really late. And now that it's not Speaker Moore making that decision and Dustin Hall might be someone who's a little more punctual. We'll see if that actually happens as far as how he runs things over there. Korie, what's your in and out?
Mine is kind of the same thing, but twofold. In would be state agencies and specifically universities returning my public records request in a reasonable amount of time. And the out would be the universities and state agencies not doing that. Last year, I had records requests that took, sometimes it's like 2 months, which not ideal, but better than nothing. But I also had records requests at universities that will not be named that lingered for 9 or 10 months. Or 6 or 7 months. So I understand that they're probably short-staffed and they have to go through legal and all of that. But if you want to help out your friendly neighborhood journalist, maybe let's get a little bit quicker. Thank you so much.
Governor Cooper's office was so slow with public records requests, like a year. That reminds me, I still have at least one, probably more outstanding. So hopefully Governor Stein gets the job done in a more timely fashion. I want to touch on 2 things that you should read in the News and Observer this week, newsobserver.com. I've got a story that will be probably posting by the time you're listening to this or at some point in the day on Monday, that kind of previews the big things to watch at the legislative session. So if you want this in story form with a little more detail, you can read that. And then Kyle, why don't you mention something that you're working on?
So I know the election was, over a month ago at this point, or 2 months at this point, but we're just now getting together all of the data on voter turnout. And we're seeing that compared to 2020, turnout was down across pretty much every demographic in North Carolina. So we're looking a little closer at those numbers and should have something next week.
Kyle, I'm going to stick with you for headliner because it relates to a little bit about our requests and what we note that the government workers are doing. So let's start with you for headliner.
Well, it's been a crazy holiday season. So we all get it, but as some new members were taking office, there were some bipartisan misspellings that we noticed coming out from different agencies and offices. We won't name any names, but just some names and some titles that were incorrect. That everybody needs an editor.
Right. So just as people criticize us for, if we have ever a mistake, we always, own it and tell people exactly as we correct it. Where we notice when y'all do it too. So actually, I'll go next because my headliner is a name. I'm, like as Korie mentioned earlier, longtime listeners would know that I covered Durham government for a while. And when I was covering Durham City Council, longtime Mayor Bill Bell was leaving office. He had a lot to do with the changes to downtown Durham. And now the city, as we record this, their ceremony is happening this day. They're renaming Vivian Street, which is this very short road that the Durham Performing Arts Center is on. And of course, former Mayor Bell was a key part of that development. They're renaming it Bill Bell Way. So that is my headliner. Korie, what's your headliner of the week?
Yeah, so I don't want to end on a downer too much, but sports fans, we talk about sports on here sometimes, and UNC basketball has had a rough stretch lately, rough game against, I think it was Louisville this past week. So, new year, I hope the basketball team can do a little bit better, and hoping for good fortune for UNC, other teams throughout the state this year.
All right, some sports optimism there. All right. For the News and Observer, I'm Dawn Vaughan with Korie Dean, Kyle Ingram, producer Laura Brache. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
For more from our politics team, subscribe to the News and Observer at newsobserver.com/subscribe. Follow us on Twitter at Under the Dome and NC Insider, and sign up for our weekly political newsletter, also called Under the Dome, at newsobserver.com/newsletters. Thanks for listening.